Hi, my name's Brian Johnson. I'm in a band called AC/DC.
From the piercing wail of Back in Black to the raw ecstasy of a stadium united in song, Johnson didn't just sing rock, he lived it. But to only see the man on stage is to miss the most compelling parts of the story, because behind that iconic leather cap and that mile-wide grin lives a paradox. A rock titan with the heart of a humble gearhead. A lifelong lover of vintage engines and winding roads, Brian Johnson's true fuel isn't just applause. It's speed, it's laughter. It's the stories etched into every note he belts and every mile he drives. He's a man equally at home, gripping the wheel of a 1965 Lola T70, as he is holding a mic before 80,000 roaring fans. A man who once fixed vinyl roofs on cars and now sails through the stratosphere of rock history. Not on ego, but on authenticity. He never chased fame, he chased feeling. And that's what this story is about. Gateshead grit, the making of a voice. Brian Johnson was born on October 5, 1947, in the industrial shadows of Dunstan Gateshead, a steel-hearted town in northern England where the streets carried the hum of factories and the scent of coal dust. It was not a place for dreams. It was a place for endurance. His father, a British Army sergeant major, was carved from the stone of discipline and duty. His mother, a gentle Italian immigrant, sang lullabies in a language of longing, melodies that swirled like smoke through their modest home. Between the fire of his father and the warmth of his mother, young Brian learned two lessons early: to stand tall and to feel deeply. The world around him was raw, iron bridges, smoke-stained windows, and the endless clatter of machines. But inside, something else stirred. Music. The radio became his escape hatch. The voice of Little Richard, the howl of Chuck Berry, they weren't just songs, they were signals. Beacons cutting through the gray skies of Gateshead. And Johnson listened like a man starving for something he couldn't name. But music wasn't a career, not here. Not for someone like him. He left school young. The classrooms held no promise, no fire. He worked where he could. Shop floors, garages, fitting vinyl roofs on cars that weren't his, for dreams that weren't his either. The jobs were hard, the hours long, but in those places, among grease-stained hands and cold morning starts, something unbreakable began to form. Grit. And then came the pubs. Dimly lit, heavy with smoke and sweat, the local bars became his proving ground. No flash, no grandeur, just a mic, a few chords, and a crowd that would let you know, real fast, if you had something worth hearing. Brian had something. A voice like steel wrapped in wildfire. He didn't sing to impress. He sang because he had to. His first band? The Gobi Desert Canoe Club, a name as rough and unpredictable as their sets. They didn't set the world on fire, but they lit his fuse. Every gig was a crucible, shaping a frontman who sang like he was wrestling fate itself. And fate was watching. Thunder Reborn. The rise of a rock titan. The year was 1980. The world was still reeling from the loss of Bon Scott, the firebrand voice of AC/DC, whose sudden death left a silence too loud to ignore. For a band built on raw voltage and swagger, the question was clear. How do you carry on when the lightning is gone? Enter Brian Johnson. He walked in as a man still bearing the soot of working-class life, still carrying the roar of factory towns in his lungs. When Johnson opened his mouth, something primal surged from deep within. A sound so ferocious, so undeniable, that the decision was made not with words, but with silence, the kind that follows awe. What followed next wasn't just a comeback. Back in Black, Johnson's debut with AC/DC didn't just mark a new chapter. It carved a monument in rock history. Released in July of that same year, the album exploded onto the scene. It wasn't just a hit. It was a resurrection anthem. For the band, for Johnson, and for fans around the world who needed a reason to believe that even death couldn't kill rock and roll. More than 50 million copies sold. Second best-selling album in human history. and at its core was Brian Johnson's voice, a rasping, volcanic howl that felt like it had clawed its way out of the earth itself. Tracks like You Shook Me All Night Long and Hell's Bells weren't just songs. They were declarations, statements, proof that from grief, glory could still be born. But it didn't end there. Johnson and AC/DC kept the engines running, full throttle. Albums like For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, and The Razor's Edge weren't just follow-ups. They were thunderclaps that shook stadiums and sent tremors through generations of music lovers. Under Johnson's charge, AC/DC didn't just survive. They evolved. They became elemental, less a band, more a force of nature. His voice was meant for truth, for fire, for fury. Whether it was a scream tearing into the night sky or a gritty growl rising from the soul, Brian Johnson gave AC/DC something sacred, authenticity. And the world listened. Yet even amidst platinum records and roaring crowds, Brian never lost his compass. Offstage, he remained unmistakably human. Sharp-witted, self-deprecating, endlessly generous. While his voice roared from speakers around the world, he was just as often found laughing behind the wheel of a vintage car or raising money for children's charities. In a world that often confuses loudness with presence, Johnson reminded us that true power lies in passion, and that sometimes the most earth-shaking sound isn't just music, it's the will to rise. Louder, fiercer, and freer than ever before. The Worth of Thunder. Brian Johnson's fortune forged in fire. For a man who once patched car roofs for a living, the numbers now seem almost surreal. Somewhere between $90 and $100 million. That's the estimated worth of Brian Johnson today. But to speak only in dollars is to miss the point entirely. His fortune isn't merely built on album sales or sold-out tours. It's built on decades of volume, resilience, and relentless authenticity. It's a currency of impact, of moments, memories, and a sound that reshaped an era. The cornerstone of that wealth is Back in Black. Not just a rock album, but a global phenomenon. With over 50 million copies sold, it remains a towering pillar of musical achievement. Its success didn't just bring Johnson fame. It made him a permanent fixture in the architecture of rock history. The royalties from that album alone could have allowed him to vanish into private luxury. But Brian Johnson was never interested in retreat. He expanded, not to escape, but to explore. His love for speed found new expression not just on the road, but on screen. Hosting Cars That Rock, Johnson invited viewers into his second great passion, automobiles. His garage includes rare and storied vehicles, some worth more than most homes. His investments extend to media, voice acting in blockbuster video games like Call of Duty, Finest Hour, and lending his presence to film cameos. Even his memoir, Rockers and Rollers, isn't a tale of rock excess, but a celebration of cars, culture, and a life lived at full tilt. It's humorous, heartfelt, and unmistakably his. And still the money keeps flowing through merchandising, streaming, licensing, and the undying loyalty of fans across continents. But ask Johnson what the wealth means, and it's unlikely he'd name a figure. Because for Brian, the truest riches aren't counted in zeros. They're measured in moments. The roar of a crowd beneath a night sky, the hum of an engine echoing through a mountain pass, the look of joy on a child's face when music and charity intersect. His fortune is not just earned, it's lived. Beyond the stage, the life Brian Johnson built. Johnson's sense of humor, warm, unfiltered, and delightfully self-aware, is legendary in its own right. Whether recounting tales from the road or writing about his lifelong love of machinery in his memoir, Rockers and Rollers, Brian delivers his stories with a wink and a punchline, the kind that turns even the wildest rock and roll saga into a fireside confession. He's the rare figure who can make you laugh even while shaking the walls. And then there's the artist beyond the amps. Few know that the frontman of AC/DC once poured his energy into musical theater, penning a rock opera adaptation of Helen of Troy. It might seem an odd pairing, the mythic queen of antiquity and a rock legend from Gateshead, but not to Brian. To him, stories are universal. Whether told through a Gibson SG or a Grecian tragedy, it's all about the drama, the emotion, the fire. Philanthropy, too, pulses through his life, like a steady beat. From raising funds for pediatric cancer at Daytona to supporting music therapy for children in Florida, his generosity is heartfelt and personal. There's no performance in it, only purpose. His home in Sarasota, Florida, reflects this quiet abundance, a sanctuary built not for display, but for joy. There, he lives in rhythm with his wife, his passions, and the wide-open roads that still call to him. There's laughter in the air, music in the walls, and garages that echo like concert halls of their own. It's a life loud in all the right places, not because it needs to be seen, but because it refuses to be muted. Love, loss, and loyalty. The heart behind the howl. For Brian Johnson, the path to rock immortality has never been a solo journey. Long before the stadiums and superstardom, there was Carol, his first wife, his anchor during the early, uncertain years, the years of pub gigs and paychecks that barely stretched. They married in 1968, young and full of grit, raising 2 daughters, Joanne and Kayla, while Johnson chased a dream that hadn't yet taken shape. Their marriage, like many first loves weathered by time and distance, eventually came to a quiet end in 1990. And then came Brenda. Not a stranger to the music world, Brenda was someone who didn't just understand the whirlwind. She knew how to move through it. Before becoming Brian's second wife, she had worked in the background of rock and roll, managing bands, navigating the chaos most never see. With Brenda, Johnson found not just a partner, but a co-pilot, someone who could read the silence between words, who knew when to step forward and when to simply stand beside him. Their love is built in the small, steady rituals of a shared life. Touring logistics scribbled over coffee, long drives in vintage cars, charity events attended side by side. She's there, in the wings, in the crowd, in the calm after the storm. Always. In Brenda, Brian found more than romance. He found rhythm, the kind of harmony that balances the ferocity of a life lived at maximum volume. Together, they've built a home in Sarasota, Florida, not just of walls and windows, but of trust and stillness, a place where legacy breathes, and love is as present as the framed gold records on the walls. In the end, for all the noise he's made, Brian Johnson's greatest power may not be his voice, but his heart, the one that still knows how to listen, how to laugh, how to love. Engines of Memory, Brian Johnson's rolling obsession.
Get it! That's what you want to hear. Oh, this is a good gift.
Before he ever held a microphone, Brian Johnson held a wrench. Long before the world knew his name, he was already chasing speed. At the front of the collection sits the Rolls-Royce Phantom. Then there's the Ferrari F40, the rebel prince of his garage. Red, furious, rare. One of just over 1,000 ever built. And the Jaguar F-Type Project 7, British racing green, only 250 in existence. A nod to heritage, to racing's golden age, to the roar of the past chasing the present down an open road. But he also holds space for the unusual. Like the 1973 Citroën DS 23 Palace, a car once called the future, now a relic of retro-futurism. With its hydraulic suspension and otherworldly design, it's a diva to maintain, a riddle to drive. And he adores it, because like all great things in Brian's life, it demands patience. And it gives back something unforgettable. And then, the crown jewel for the true speed believer, the 1965 Lola T70 Mark I, a purebred racer, untamed and unapologetic. It doesn't belong in a driveway. It belongs on a track, screaming through time. Johnson doesn't keep it locked away. He drives it, feels it, becomes it. These aren't just acquisitions, they're companions. Each one marks a chapter, a moment, a mood. Still rolling. Brian Johnson's second thunder. Not long ago, it seemed the roar of Brian Johnson might be lost forever. Struggling with severe hearing loss, he was forced to step away from the very thing that defined him, the stage. For a man whose soul was forged in sound, silence wasn't just a threat. It was a fracture. But Brian Johnson doesn't fade. He finds a way. Thanks to cutting-edge auditory technology, a custom-built in-ear system developed with military-grade precision, Johnson made an almost mythical return to form. And in the fall of 2024, the Thunder returned for real. AC/DC's Power Up World Tour ignited across Europe and beyond, marking one of the most triumphant comebacks in rock history. From Gelsenkirchen's Veltins Arena to Wembley Stadium's sold-out nights, Johnson's voice tore through the skies like a war cry reborn. And by March 2025, as the tour concluded its South American leg in Sao Paulo, it had already become one of the highest-grossing rock tours of the decade, a living, roaring testament to resilience. Every night, tens of thousands sang not just to the songs, but to the man behind them, a man who had every reason to stop and every reason not to. As of May 2025, the band is taking a brief hiatus before resuming tour dates in North America this summer. Johnson, now 77, shows no signs of slowing. In recent interviews, he's hinted at new collaborations, possibly even lending his voice to a feature documentary on the history of rock's greatest live acts. A fitting chapter for a man who has spent half a century commanding the stage. But off the road, life hums at a different frequency. In Sarasota, Florida, Johnson's world is softer, but no less vivid. The mornings begin with the crackle of vinyl records, the low rumble of a classic engine rolling out for a joyride, or the smell of motor oil mingling with ocean air. He's still racing, still tinkering, still grinning like a schoolboy behind the wheel of a 1965 Lola. His wife Brenda remains his unwavering companion, not just in love, but in purpose. They continue to support charitable causes, including a recent $100,000 donation to the Austin Hatcher Foundation, where Brian helped unveil a new pediatric therapy wing bearing his name. In this phase of life, there's no retreat, only recalibration. He still writes, still plays, still lives in rhythm with the world, a world that, in many ways, is finally catching up to the depth behind the decibels. Because for Brian Johnson, legacy isn't just about what's behind him, it's about what he's still building.
That's cool, me son. It's nice mementos, aren't there, from the past? Yeah. There's nothing here that shouldn't be. It's fantastic.
I like that.
Now we turn the mic to you. What part of Brian's journey struck a chord with you? Was it the comeback, the cars, the quiet strength behind the spectacle? Let us know in the comments. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because stories like his deserve to live on in conversation, in memory, and in you. And if this glimpse into a life lived at full volume moved you, we invite you to stay. Subscribe, explore, reflect, because every Sunday, we return to the past, not to escape the present, but to understand it. This is Flashback Sunday, and some echoes are too powerful to fade.